war in Iran. Now, Nigeria's economy is already feeling the ripple effects of surging global oil prices after Brent crude climbed above $100 per barrel. While the rally could boost government revenues, strengthen foreign exchange reserves, and also widen fiscal buffers, it is also pushing domestic fuel prices higher. Petrol prices have risen sharply across fueling stations, increasing transport and production cost. For households and businesses still adjusting to economic reforms, the oil surge presents a paradox. Stronger national earnings from crude export, but higher costs. Now we're going to be joined by our economist in the, joining us via Zoom now. Mr. Onakare is joining us and will be speaking on the current situation as we see it here in Nigeria. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Now, the oil prices are going up across nations. Everybody is feeling the strife of what's happening in Iran with the Strait of Hormuz being blocked. But could you explain to us, layman version, exactly why Nigeria is feeling this right now, only just 1 week after the war started?
Well, it's unfortunate that the war has lasted so long. The diplomatic community is still hopeful for a peaceful resolution, a timely resolution of the issues. As hard as it is, it's going to affect emerging economies, energy importing economies such as Nigeria. Thankfully, we have Dangote refinery, so that reduced significantly the cost of importing refined petroleum products, which is also being affected by the constraints at the Strait of Hormuz that controls like 20%. That's 1 in every 5 oil transporters seabound is constrained, so we have a 20% drop in terms of supply. For Nigeria, part of the issue we have is that part of the crude oil that Dangote also depends on, that refinery is imported, and that means automatically those costs increase crude oil prices, as well as the supply constraints has placed Dangote also in a very difficult position, and naturally the cost is going to be passed on to the people, the end users. So we expect that this is going to have significant inflationary pressure across all index in the country, where food prices are likely to go higher. Cost of living across different areas, housing, transportation are going to be affected. Manufacturing and production is also going to be affected, which means that overall we have significant pressure on the economy. It also creates an investment bottleneck, as most investors in periods like this would also seek to put their monies in safe havens, which means that even some of the infrastructural developments we're looking for, some of the partnerships we're praying for are going to be delayed. So the war between Israel, US, and Iran has very, very severe and significant impact on the Nigerian economy, even though it seems so far away.
Mr. Onakare, let's first of all focus on Nigeria. I'm going to come back and ask you about that investment flight now. However, in Nigeria here, if you could please explain to us how bad it could get. We see that this is only the start of the war here and prices are already going up. How high could prices go if the price for fuel or the price for crude oil currently is almost topping at $100 or $120 per barrel? What are we looking at in the next, and if the war persists for the next 2 or 3 weeks?
This war continues for the next 2 to 3 weeks. We should be looking at prices in the region of 1,000. And depending on how severe it comes, it could rise as much as 1,005. Several countries are releasing their reserves, and Nigeria will be expected to do the same to cushion the effect of the increase in prices. It's unavoidable because as the cost of crude oil affects cost of production, supply chain cost affects cost of production. So there is no way that Dangote refinery would be operational and profitable if it is running at a loss. And we do not want to go back to the previous regime of oil subsidy positions and all, although countries may be constrained to do that. The fear also is that with increasing inflation and the fragility of the economy, there's a looming recession that will blanket the country, because as investment slows down and as productivity slows down based on constraints on supply chains, it becomes inevitable that the country will fold in on itself and have negative growth cycles.
Okay. So to piggyback on one of the questions, or rather answers that you gave from before regarding investors wanting their monies to be safe, mostly the safe haven would be America, and that's in dollars. This is going to strengthen the dollar. Back to my question about who exactly might be gaining from the war right now and if this was a strategic move by America. Because in the end, it seems that they would still, well, be at an advantage when investors keep their monies in dollars. What's your take?
Okay, so it's a very interesting balance that we have. And as you rightly said, America would be least impacted in the short term. But in the long term, they're also going to have a lot of issues. The safe havens I mentioned are U.S. Treasury bills and gold, commodities such as gold that are seen traditionally as havens for funds. The challenge that a lot of people are not looking at, the economic implication, is that though most of the world depends on the oil supply from the Strait of Hormuz, America has long shifted to shale oil or shale production, and that reduces their own dependence on those situations. It also creates a constraint for their economy, because now that production that they depend on from other side of the world, production and energy-dependent areas such as Japan, India, will be constrained by the prices, which means that the cost of products and the cost of living on their side as well is going to be affected. So in a way, it's not really, no one really benefits from this war. And the longer it goes, the more constraint it's going to have on everybody, the global economy, even down to our country in Nigeria.
Now, each time we hear about the Strait of Hormuz, it's always about oil. But the Strait of Hormuz is actually access to the Gulf nations for more than just oil. And I'm wondering how that's affecting other basic things, like food, for instance, noting that these are arid nations and that they import their food as well. Also, to a great extent, water, pharmaceuticals. How is that going to affect these countries, and how might that also affect countries that are supplying these items?
The Strait of Hormuz is a very historic position. It's a very historic channel that has been used to transport goods from Asia from the Far East in Asia to the Middle East, down to Africa, and it's situated between, I think, Iran has territorial control, but between Iran and Oman. The interesting thing is that right now, the significance has actually borne more in terms of oil transportation, because like 80% of global oil is transported via oil tankers, and that is a significant channel for them in terms of transportation. The other areas that you talked about, other import positions, also have alternative channels. However, because everything is based on the energy and the energy dependence of production and general productivity, means that they will also not be insulated from the constraints that will come from the war. And all the Gulf nations from there, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, who use it for transportation of oil, would also be affected in terms of shrinking national GDPs, shrinking investment portfolio, shrinking tourism appeal to the rest of the world, which means that everything that makes for life, every other channel of revenue for the countries are constrained. This translates directly to the cost of living of the people. The cost of pharmaceuticals is going to rise. I mean, it's actually quite challenging. There's a country in the Gulf region that supplies about 40% of global helium, which is a significant component of semiconductors and in the electronics industry. So, I mean, we're now talking about transition into different markets based on the constraints of movement and concerns about security and investment safety.
Mr. Anokare, with the U.S. now, how long can their oil reserves go? And even at the end of that, if they need more, who would they ally with to be able to get it? Focusing on Africa now, and also noting that they have presence here in Nigeria, I hate to say that I am actually stringing you along with the answer, but I'm wondering how all of these dynamics actually come into one mix. Their relationship with an African country that's oil producing, their oil reserves when it might run out, and what the situation might be when it does.
Well, the geopolitics of the energy sector is very interesting, and the landscape has changed significantly in recent times. If you recall, America took Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and pushed to control the country's oil reserve production channels. So, there are some beliefs in some areas that it was all strategic leading up to the assault on Iran, the war on Iran. And America, in a way, would have insulated itself from too much exposure and too much dependence on other channels of supply. Another big supply position is Russia, but we know how the relationship between America and Russia, if the constraints, it will suffer. So America may seek a partnership with an African nation, like you said, but also, I mean, it's not as straightforward as many would say. For one, our own crude production is significantly less than what we would hope for. But more than that, we also already have pre-arrangements and contracts. I mean, our own Dangote refinery has had to supplement supply of crude oil to keep the refinery going. So there isn't, I'm not sure there's so much of a leeway for a counter-reference independence, especially in the immediate term. The shale production end of America's oil concern gives them a buffer as well. America, it must be noted, is one of the larger deposits of crude oil, though not as good as the one that we have in Nigeria. But the fact is they have, and it becomes a question of improved refining. Another significant issue that this entire work will bring back is acceleration of dependence on alternative energy, how to make them more efficient and more affordable, so that conflicts such as these, especially with the historical reference of the Middle East instability, issues come up from there. We wouldn't have the whole world would not have to suffer from the impact of two conflicting nations.
Mr. Anakari, I want to say thank you very much for that very interesting explanation of the relationship between Nigeria and America. I've never heard it like that before. I think I'm going to go study that one. Thank you very much once again.